Right, so let's move on to length and curl of eyelash extensions. If you already do eyelash extensions and you're kind of just using this to upskill, you will know how confusing it is trying to understand the lengths, the curls, the variations of eyelash extension out there. If you're completely new to the industry, there is a lot for you to learn when it comes to length, curls, in terms of eyelash extensions for classics and pre-made volume. Most of the time, in terms of curl, we will use a C, a CC, and a D, which are kind of the curls in the middle of this table here. In your manual, it will explain and break down the curls for you. We're going to go over the styling manual after I've gone over this main manual and I've given you a bit more of an in-depth explanation on curls. But for example, a C curl will work for everyone. And in my salon, most of the time, I tend to use a C curl. It's a curl that works for everyone. It's not too curly, it's not too straight, and it kind of just sits. I'm trying to work out how to show this in this little video. So you'd have your C curl, which gives you this sort of curl, and then you'd have your CC, which is a bit more of a curl, and then your D, which gives more of a curl. And what I always think is C works for everyone and D gives lift. So a D is a curlier lash. So if you can imagine, if it's curlier, it sits up a little bit higher. So for example, and again, we'll cover this more within the styling element, but when we are working with eyelash extensions, we can create symmetry across the face by using lengths in certain areas and curls in certain areas. So, for example, a lot of clients will come in and they'll have a slight downturn. Some clients will have an upturn. Some clients will have eyes that sit further apart. Some clients will have eyes that sit closer together. But as a quick example, if a client has a downturn, what we want to do is basically do the opposite and correct that downturn. So on the outer of the lashes, we would use a decal. So a decal would lift. So for me, when I'm lashing, C curl will work for everyone, but if I need to give a bit of lift or I want a bit of extra glamour, then I'm going to use a curlier curl. On my own lashes, a C or a CC works perfectly. But we do use some decals, like I say, if we want to really open up the eyes, or for some of those ladies that love a glamorous look. What you do need to take into account as well when you are lashing with curls, a C curl will sit like this on most clients. However, on me, I have naturally curly lashes. So actually a C curl sits like a CC curl. Just because I have a natural curl on my lashes, the extension sits up a little bit higher. I'll talk about this again a little bit more in the styling manual, but again, if someone has super, super straight lashes, so straight naturals, a C curl is going to sit lower, so it's going to be less of a curl, if that makes sense. So there is a lot to take into consideration when we're looking at eyelash extensions. But for now, I would work with potentially, to keep it simple, a C curl or a D curl, or if you wanted to kind of do a bit of a middle range in terms of curl, you can use the CC. B, BB are less curly, and then you've got your DD, which is more curly, and then a couple of kind of specialist curls in terms of LC, LD, and M curl, but we won't go over those too much today just because it confuses everything. And then we've got length. Length of eyelash extension. So our own naturals, it's always so important to remember our inner lashes and our outer lashes are the weakest lashes that we have on our eyes. So we do need to take that into account when we are applying eyelash extensions. And we want to work across the eyes in terms of length. So it's not one length across the whole eye. We work with the natural lashes. Generally, in my salon, I will start with a shorter lash. I will come up in length and then go down in length towards the outers. Generally, just to make sure I'm working with those inners and outers to make sure that I'm not adding too much weight or too much length to cause any drooping. If you can see on this little image here in front of you, there is a map. So we start on a 7 or an 8mm on those inner lashes and we go up in length. And most of the time when I'm adding length, I would always add length above the iris. And then I would go back down in length. And that sort of eyelash styling really works to open up the eyes. I would say the typical length that you would want to stock in your salon would be a 7mm up to maybe a 13 or a 14mm. I think they are generally the range of lengths that we use on a regular basis. We do have a few ladies that like that longer length, but if we are using a longer length, generally we'll drop down in dimension. And if you can remember, we talked about dimension earlier. Dimension is how many lashes are in a fan. So a 2D, a 3D, a 4D, a 5D. Some clients might not have the most amazing natural lashes, but they want that length. We can absolutely give length, but we can drop down in dimension. So instead of doing, a 60 or a 70, for example, we can give them that length and drop down to a 3D or a 4D. We can absolutely mix dimensions within our lash sets as well. So again, you can see in this image on those inner lashes, I would recommend maybe using a 3D or a 4D and then moving up in dimension towards the midsections and again down in dimension towards the outer sections. So hopefully that makes sense. We will go through this a little bit more on the training day. We'll have a little bit about curls up on the board, but when you start using your eyelash extensions and putting it into practice, it will all make so much more sense. Lash thickness. So in addition to the curls and in addition to the lengths, we have lash thicknesses. And again, we briefly touched on this earlier when we were looking at the comparison in terms of weight. So lash diameters generally range from 0.03, which would be your finer lashes, which you would find within a fan, up to around a 0.2. So a 0.12, a 0.15, a 0.18, a 0.2 is generally your classic lash. So your individual lashes. The finer the lashes, the more you can use. Generally, that is going to be what we would use within a pre-made volume fan. Lash mapping and styling. So I'm just going to cut this section off here just because I am going to go over advanced styling within the styling manual. So created a styling manual called Illusion, and I'm going to go over that. I'm going to just finish this video here because we've talked about length and curls for 7 minutes. I'm going to come back and talk briefly about styling, but I will go into styling much more within my Illusion manual.